I'm David Jones. There may be a couple of you don't know me. I've been doing this about 9 years here with the Learning Center. My background, I'm actually now going to teach a course that's related to my background. I've been teaching mostly history, and I've never taken a history course. But now I'm doing business, and I actually have a PhD in business. So and spent a long time in the corporate world and as a professor. In fact, I've worked with or for a couple of these companies that we're going to talk about today. So we'll get right on into it so that Irish myths won't be delayed too much by mythology of business. What we're going to talk about today is, and through the course, is really about the founders and the early history of the company. So we're going to more or less stop at around World War II and then maybe do a brief, here's what happened since then with the companies, except for Walmart, which didn't start until 1962, so we can't do that with them. But for the most part, we'll talk about history rather than current events. I consider anything after 1946 current events because the world's most important event happened that year. It happened to be my birthday, so. So anything after that is current events, anything before is history. So we'll get right into it. But again, the focus is not current day things, but kind of the history of looking at it. And I will try occasionally to focus a little bit on the business aspects of it, is what made these companies different from their competitors. Procter & Gamble, for example, there were a lot of other companies in Cincinnati making soap and candle products when they got started. How is it they separated themselves? How did Dupont, how do all these companies separate themselves from the competitors? We need to first think about the idea of corporations and why that's an important concept, both socially and politically, legally. It goes back really to Roman times. Romans had something similar to what we think of as corporations, but it really got started in around 1600 with what were called joint stock companies. There was a big problem at that time of ships going out into the unknown world pretty much in the late 1500s, and no one individual could afford all the risk of sending these ships out for exploring or for trading. And they started putting together groups that would fund ships of exploration, ships of transportation and trading. And they formalized this with the British East India Company in 1600. And the Joint Stock Company, the idea kind of caught on and went to the Dutch East India Company. So these are companies that are traded in India and the East Indies, largely for spice and some textiles and some other things. But the idea here is that we've got a group of investors who are pooling their capital so we can get more money together to finance these very expensive endeavors. And they spread the risk of that. And the way that they're organized is that if it goes under, basically what you're losing is only your investment. Nobody's going to come after your house or your castle or palace, whatever it is, unless you've committed fraud. So there's a sharing of the risk. Now comes the Industrial Revolution, and we start needing more and more capital to build the companies that are going to do the textiles, the locomotives, the railroads, all these kinds of things that take a lot of capital. So the businesses are becoming larger, they're becoming more complex, and we say required large amounts of money to invest in them. You just don't say, oh, let's get together and build a railroad. It takes a lot of financing to be able to do those kinds of things. So the corporate form where we can spread the risk, spread the financial loss potential among a variety of different folks, helped us to build the large industries that we've seen, the railroads and other kinds of infrastructure projects. Well, let's look at what happened in the United States. A lot of that stuff is in Britain and in Europe, but in the United States, when we first got going, we see that forming corporations was very difficult and very complex. Forming any kind of business was difficult, and took special forms. It took a charter. The legislature had to do something to create a charter to create a business. So each one is kind of unique. This particular one is an act of the legislature of Georgia in 1822 to authorize a ferry between Elbert and Madison counties to be called the Denny Ferry. They go right down to specifying who's going to be in it. It's Edward Denny and his sons and a son-in-law who are going to do it. And then right down to what the ferry charge is. So each loaded wagon and 6 horses, $1. Empty wagon and 6 horses, 62.5 cents. And right on down to, for a head of cattle, it's 3 cents. For each sheep, goat, hog, it's 1.5 cents. And this is an act of the legislature telling the Denny's exactly what they can charge. So these are the kinds of things that were going on for creating a business. Now, as it so happens that Edward Denny is my great-great-great-great-grandfather. So we have this, found this in doing my genealogical research, but when I was talking about special charters, it hit me, oh, we've got one in the family here that's a representation of this. They're limited in their availability. I mean, you've got to get to the legislature to get one. So that limits and their inconsistency. You know, the next guy who comes for a ferry on another river is going to have a different parameters set for what's going to happen. So there's no consistency in them. So we see early in the 19th century, corporation law, states started providing a way to build a corporation without having to have a special charter every time we're going to have a business. Started in 1811 in New York, and it was pretty rough. It was still not highly consistent or standardized, but it was a beginning toward corporate formations. By 1883, every state had one together. Interestingly, Delaware was the last state to do it, and they became the most popular state in which to form corporations. If you see most corporations today that were founded before about 1980 or so, they're probably a Delaware corporation. Key aspects of put into corporate law standards. So now we've got a standard form about how companies are going to be organized, and this goes pretty much across most of the states. Each state still has their own charter rules for doing it, but within that, they're uniform, and across states, they're reasonably uniform. Accessible, if you've got the feed for filing, you can get it. Then we've got equal treatment. It doesn't care who you are, unlike in the days when my family got the charter. If you were on the outs with the governor, you might not get it through. They're from the same part of Georgia where John Clark was from. That's up in the upper Elbert counties up north of Augusta over there. And so now we've got equal treatment under law. So this is the idea of corporations. Key advantage for the business is as we talked about, they limit the liability of that. So you can't lose your house unless you commit fraud, only the amount of money you've put into the company. Perpetual existence. Unlike a proprietorship or a partnership, if somebody dies, there went the business. But here the business can continue on regardless of who the owners are, because it's transferable ownership. So you can leave the stock to somebody else, or you can sell the stock to somebody else. So this makes it very convenient. Unlike those special charters where if the Denny's want to pull out of that, well, the whole thing collapses and somebody's got to start all over again. We've got existence and transferable ownership here. This gives us better access to capital because now the company represents a set of assets that can be easily gathered together and sold off in the case of failure of the business. So that makes capital easy to get for people to loan them money. We can get professional management. It's no longer now just the family or the partners who they can hire real professionals to do the work. There are also social benefits to the corporation. Economic growth. Now we've got more money together. We can take bigger projects. So this spurs the economy. We can have innovation. Again, it takes money to innovate, do research and development. So now we've got that money available. We're creating jobs. So we saw this job explosion in the Industrial Revolution. And we still see today that corporations are still driving this. Developing infrastructure that we never had before. So building the Erie Canal, building the Transcontinental Railroad, these kinds of things are now possible with the corporate form. And we've got global trade, so we can take advantage of comparative advantage where some products can be made more efficiently in different places. We can trade and we benefit from trade. And so that leads to wealth creation. So corporation is a very powerful entity, both politically and socially, for the betterment of society overall. Well, let's go on to our first one today. This is Dupont. And we got their picture here from advertisement for gunpowder. And this is how Dupont started, was making gunpowder. Now, why is gunpowder important? Well, we think about what's important today to life. What would make life most difficult today if we didn't have?
Electricity.
Electricity. How about computer chips? Yeah. So think about gunpowder kind of in relation to being computer. They're everywhere. They're integrated in society. So everything in early America it really revolves around gunpowder. So it's part of daily life. It touches survival day to day. It touches the economy, politics, culture. We don't think much about it today, but in the early days, you would have thought a lot about gunpowder. It's used for military. It's used for defense, obvious things. One of Washington's consistent big problems was getting enough gunpowder. When he took over the Army in June of 1775, he found out that he had 36 kegs of gunpowder available. Whereas most soldiers would carry 25 to 30 rounds or cartridges, he only had enough for 5 or 6 for each person. They had to pull back at Bunker Hill because they didn't have enough gunpowder. So one of the big problems is there was no production in America to speak of. We had to get it somewhere else. So a constant problem there. We need it for hunting and sporting life. A lot of people, remember, this is an agrarian, rural society. Most people live out of the cities. So hunting is important. In a lot of places, keeping the Native American population away was also important here. So there's great economic importance here. It can create jobs. A lot of things depend on and revolve around having gunpowder. As the country started to expand, we're mining and construction, we're building roads, we need resources from the ground. Gunpowder is the explosive of the time. This is before dynamite and TNT. So this is, just put a lot of gunpowder in a stump to blast it out to get it out of the way of building a road. So all these things are important. This is in today's celebration and entertainment. Every New Year's, we have a lot of fireworks, and we have a lot of people who are firing in the air. Unbelievable. So celebration and entertainment is there. A lot of the chemical advancements that were made of understanding the nature of chemicals was made through the development of gunpowder. So it leads to research and technological advancement. And it's also, much as the Second Amendment for many people today is a symbolic political symbol, gunpowder was at the time of recognizing independence and our ability to survive in the world, may depend on our availability of gunpowder. Well, there was virtually no U.S. production of gunpowder at the time when the Duponts came and started thinking about getting into the business. But gunpowder is a very simple thing. It's just kind of 3 chemicals you put together, 75% potassium nitrate, otherwise called saltpeter, 15% charcoal, usually softwood charcoal, and 10% sulfur. Mix those together, in such a way that they don't fall apart when you're walking with them. Yeah, it's very important that this mixture stay together, but one of the problems was that it tends to separate as you walk, and so you take out your powder horn and you've got the potassium nitrate at the bottom because the sulfur in the middle and charcoal at the top. Well, that doesn't do much good when you try to pour it into your weapon in here. So techniques had to come about for mixing, for graining or corning to keep the pieces together. So there's a lot of technology to get good, consistent gunpowder here. Our story of Dupont starts with Pierre Samuel Dupont. This will be the father, really, of the founder, but Pierre has a tremendous role in the founding of the company as well. His father was a Huguenot watchmaker. His mother was a minor noble. This was a common plague of France, a lot of minor nobles. And they are French. They're from France. He didn't want to be a watchmaker, so his father kicked him out of the house and, kind of go make your own way. But he became the protege of one of the leading economists of the time, and physician. He was actually the physician to Madame Pompadour, who was the chief mistress of Louis XVI. But Quinet was kind of one of the early formal economists, and his group are really pushing for more formal recognition of economics and leading the charge for economic and agricultural reform in here. So Pierre Samuel gets really caught up in that. His writings on national economy and thinking capture the attention of Voltaire and in Britain of Adam Smith. I mean, if you've ever taken a business course, you've heard of Adam Smith. He was kind of the founder of economics, looking at the power of the invisible hand, how free markets work, and had a great influence on most of these economics down to today. So a lot of his ideas originated with Dupont. He's invited by the king of Poland. There was no Poland at the time, but the territory that would later become Poland wanted him to help organize its educational system. He serves as the Inspector General for the Commerce. We think of it today as the Secretary of Commerce under Louis XVI. And he was one of those that Louis assigned to help to negotiate the Treaty of Paris. This is the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War, so between Britain and the U.S. So he's heavily involved then in things related to America from an early date. He gets ennobled. In other words, he's made an aristocrat, a noble, by Louis XVI for his work. And this adds the demure to his name to indicate that he's now a noble guy, high-class person now. He initially supported the French Revolution in 1789, 1780, 1790 time frame, and served for a while, in fact, as the president of the National Constituent Assembly. So he is kind of high-ranked in the Republican part of will eventually overthrow Louis. Now his son, this is his second son, quite a mouthful, Éluthé Irénée Dupont de Nemours. Now, try to say that fast 3 times. We'll call him EI. Most people either called him EI or Irénée, because that first one is a tongue twister. He started in college at the Collège Royal in Paris, but he soon went on to kind of an apprenticeship with Antoine Lavoisier, who is known as the father of chemistry. So he is the leading chemist in the world of exploring, developing new ideas in chemistry. So he's well placed with them. One of the jobs that Lavoisier oversaw was the making of gunpowder. So France had a great gunpowder manufacturing that was run by the state, and Lavoisier is in charge of that, and EI goes to work with him. So he learns basic extraction methods for getting the chemicals out that they need for manufacturing, and he studied the advanced techniques of this. He married a minor noble again, Sophie d'Aumont. They had 8 children, all of whom survived into adulthood, which was really rare for this time. And when he was 20, just after he married Sophie, he started helping his father run a publishing business, and among the things they're publishing are a Republican newspaper. So these are kind of the anti-monarch when we talk about Republicans. He became a member of, a supporter of Robespierre and the Jacobins, so he's fairly active in this. But the French Revolution gets more dramatic as we think about it, and they kind of turn on one another at some point in here. And the Duponts, though, think when they want to execute the king and queen that they've gone too far. So they've made an attempt to defend them when they were taken from the Tuileries Palace and ultimately executed. So now they're kind of not on good terms with the Republicans because they've made a defense of Louis and Marie Antoinette. So Pierre gets arrested. He's sentenced to the guillotine in here. And while he's waiting, and for some reason they kind of keep dragging out the execution date, much as we do today, you know, that death penalty for some reason for him. But it was lucky for him because Robespierre, who's kind of the driving force behind the Jacobins here and the violent things, gets overthrown. And so all his enemies get taken out of jail. So he gets spared here. Well, with things being a little testy for them here, they get arrested again. Not quite clear exactly what they did, but they spent a night in jail, and it basically at this point says, do we have other options? Here. So in 1778, they planned a land speculation deal in Virginia along the James River Valley here. But they got a few investors, but they didn't get enough to make the whole thing work, and so it kind of collapsed. But this idea of going to America kind of stays with them. Victor, the elder son, comes as a French consul to the U.S. He's over in Charleston working there. And he says, come on over, guys. You know, we've got some business opportunities over here. And we know you like to study nature. And there's plenty of new flora and fauna to look at. This also kind of became their cover for investigating America, is that they were going on scientific adventure, not just trying to escape. So in October of 1799, they sell the publishing business, they board a ship, and head for America. Well, it takes them 3 months to get here. Now, this is a time when it normally takes 5 or 6 weeks. So they've got provisions for 6 or 8 weeks, or sometimes it takes longer. So when they arrived, they were essentially in starvation conditions because for whatever reason, it just took a very long time, you know, wind and weather going against them to get here. But immediately they go out to start investigating what kind of business we're going to be in. They have no idea at this point what they can do, so they start. Victor gets him a house at Bergen Point, New Jersey, kind of across from Staten Island, so very near to New York City. Victor and Pierre go to New York. They start meeting with various people here. They meet with Jefferson and Hamilton in here to start exploring possibilities at this time. Soon Jefferson will be running for president, so he's quite influential here. Meanwhile, EI tours the country. So he goes out, and something out here on his tour changes fate for both them and the country. Now, this may be apocryphal, but this is the way that history is told in here. And by the way, Dupont was one of the companies I worked for, and one of the first things they give you at orientation is a history of the Duponts. So they're very proud of their work and whatnot. So they want everybody to kind of buy into the Dupont family. So this is one of the first things you learn in here. That he's an ex-French officer. Remember, the French were very helpful for us in the Revolutionary War. So there are a lot of ex-French officers over here. So they're going on a hunting trip. Nei raises his rifle and fires. Nothing happens. It's a dud. So what's the matter with this gunpowder in here? So he starts hearing from his friend and several others about problems with the quality of gunpowder in America. He tours a little plant that makes gunpowder, and he's just horrified by what he sees about how they're doing it, how dangerous what they're doing is. So light bulb goes off in here. So he sees an opportunity. He says, you know, I know how to make some gunpowder. So he starts doing that. He's encouraged by this time, it's President Jefferson, to do it, because Jefferson recognizes the need that the military has for quality gunpowder. So he gets going. He returns to Paris to try to raise the money. There's not a lot of money available in the States at this time for starting new enterprises. So he goes to France to get raise money, get investors, and to get the equipment he needs, because he knows there's none in America. The previous investors, those who had tried to get into the land deal, signed right up. They want to do anything to help Napoleon, and they're especially anxious now that they're at war with the British to do something that will hurt the British. So we're still buying gunpowder from Britain, so if we stop buying gunpowder because we have our own, that will hurt the British. So we're in. So they signed an act of association in April of 1801 to get underway. Now, they still kind of have the formal structure of the land speculation company, so they kind of divide that up, break it into a couple of pieces. One based in Paris, because they have the limited liability protection in Paris that they don't have in the States. So that's where the investment comes through at this point. And then they create EI's company, which is really kind of a subdivision of the overall holding company that the father and brothers have created. They get it capitalized at $36,000. That's about $900,000 today, nearly $1 million maybe. 18 shares at $2,000 each, so they get it divided up, and sold 3 of these in France and 4 in America to a fellow named Pierre or Peter Bauduit. He's going to be a key investor and later a pain in the neck. And the kind of this holding company that the father and brothers have created own the majority of the shares. So EI doesn't hold any in the company directly. He holds it through this holding company. They start looking for a factory. So they look around in Virginia, Pennsylvania, where there was a small factory, in Federal City. Today we call that Washington, D.C. Back then it was Federal City. And they found an abandoned cotton mill along the Brandywine River near Wilmington, Delaware. And so it's got kind of a little bit of infrastructure, some water wheels, some buildings that they can use. So this is a good place. And it's near a group of French immigrants who are there. So they got somebody to talk to and potential workers. But it's not legal for an alien. They're not citizens yet, so aliens are not allowed to own land in Delaware. So they have to get to one of these immigrants who's been naturalized to get him to sign up, so he gets brought into the company. Jefferson and Hamilton tried to get Delaware to change that. They wouldn't, so they had to bring in somebody else. So on July 19th, 1802, we see the formal starting of Dupont. They bring in equipment from France. They use the cotton mill facilities to generate energy. So everything's run by water power. So they've got water wheels, turbines, gear shifts, all these things that are manipulated by water. So everything from the rolling mills to anything that's going on is water powered. And they use the French techniques that he's learned under Lavoisier. Professional management. They hire some quality managers to get in here who know how to work machinery in general and start doing this. They're very skilled. They train people. They just don't bring people in and say, all right, go to work. They have a training program so they can get them in skilled, and they're highly disciplined in their process. And there's great concern. As you might imagine, there is some danger of working with gunpowder. I mean, its whole purpose is to explode. And it's likely to explode if you don't treat it right when you're making it. So there's going to be some accidents, but there's a great deal of concern for safety. And that's one, it's been 50 years almost since I worked for DuPont, and I still remember some of the safety things that I learned from them 50 years ago. They recruited a lot of Irish immigrants. This is before the famine even, remember, but they're still Irish immigrants. They hire a lot of those. They fund or loan money to bring families and everything over. Over a period of years, they bring in more than 1,500 Irish immigrants who are going to work, many of them, family members, children, and so forth. So they're heavily invested in the Irish community there. They build housing. They build a nice little house for themselves and for 30 workers and their families in here. So they are, from the beginning, are concerned about the treatment of their employees. Well, let's go back to see what happened to Pierre Samuel. He had met Jefferson when Jefferson was an envoy and ambassador to Paris back right after the Revolutionary War and our first government. Since he heard about what he had done for Poland, he asked him to make a plan for American education. So Pierre makes a plan. Never gets implemented here, but a lot of his ideas are later adopted in Europe for their programs. He becomes a go-between between Jefferson and Napoleon, since he's from France, knows Napoleon in there. He advises him about purchasing a little piece of land out west of the Mississippi. It says there will be one way to keep Napoleon from bringing troops over here. That's one of the great fears they have, that they want to expand Louisiana, bring troops over. And he says they need the money. They're fighting the British. So they go through and get Louisiana. He and his wife, though, returned shortly to France. And he holds several government posts under Napoleon. But in 1814, when Napoleon has his penultimate defeat, he helps in the process of getting him deposed and exiled to Elba. But as we know, the next year, Napoleon comes back, and we have the 100 Days. So it's not too healthy to be anti-Napoleon at this time. So he and his wife come back to the States. And he died in 1817 here. But so we see he had a key role in kind of the founding of the company and in some of the big things that happened in early America. Well, the company starts having some financial difficulties, cash flow problems. Now, this business is largely one of selling your product on credit, long-term credit. But what do you need to make your product? You need materials and you need labor. And they have to be paid for now. So you get into a situation where you don't have cash coming in, but you got cash, so you need loans in here. So you need long-term loans in here. So they sought help from one of their key investors, Peter Bourdieu. He's got 11 of the 18 shares, and he wants a greater share here in running the business. He thinks there's some things that he can do to help tweak the business, but the DuPonts don't want him in. They want to keep it close to their management in here. So he says, I want to be a full partner, not a sleeping partner. Now, the normal procedure in France is that you make your investment, you sit back, and you watch what happens. You're not involved. But in America, there's more of a tradition of investors being more actively involved on the board of directors, making decisions about what goes on. So this is kind of the role he wants. But they say, no, you can't have that. This is the French model. You're a sleeping partner. But they consulted their lawyers, including Hamilton in New York. This was one of the last things that Hamilton did before he had his fateful meeting with Aaron Burr here. So now there becomes a big feud between EI and Pierre Baudry in here. EI is afraid he's going to lose control of the business. He's also a little bit paranoid. He kind of sees shadows where there's nothing really happening in here. So he thinks that there's really a plot against him. Baudry is just trying to be a good businessman and watch out for his investment, but that's not the way EI sees it. And there's a big argument over the name of what to call the company. It's proposed by Baudry that they call it EI, Dupont, de Nemours and Company, which seems like a perfectly reasonable name, but EI starts thinking that, well, that and company means that I'm not fully in charge by having that in there. And so, no, I don't want to name it that. Seems a little silly to us today, but that was him. At about the same time, Victor wants to put an ad in the paper to say, you know, we're in business. So he calls the company EI Dupont de Nemours Gunpowder Manufactory, another mouthful here, and says, you know, new and extensive establishment. We're now in business. High quality. We'll deliver anywhere on short notice, so forth. So this is one suggestion for the name in here. So no and company here in the name, right? So it implies that EI is fully in charge here. Well, Baudry says, I'm going to pull out. You know, well, this could be a disaster because it's really his business credibility that they've been giving credit to the gunpowder company. So if he pulls out, then they're going to be in trouble. They're not going to get more loans. So, but somehow they got to keep him in. So EI reluctantly agrees to give it his name and company in here, which is what it's going to be known for about the next 218 years or so. But this really has an effect, this whole experience, on how EI views management and control. So he's going to work toward kicking out all those other investors, getting it down to simply family-owned business. About this time, we see that Jefferson has been president for a few months now. He's surveyed the needs of the military, and he tells the military, you got to buy your gunpowder from DuPont's. They're the only ones that are making decent gunpowder. So he sends them a letter saying, I'm telling the military to buy powder from you. So he says, with real pleasure, that the Navy and military will be ordering gunpowder from him. So even though they've been in business less than a year now of actually manufacturing, they are up there with attention to the president and so forth. So he's got a very solid operating philosophy. Manufacture high quality, specialized powder. Not every type of powder, but military grade kind of powder. Get large. Get economies of scale that the other manufacturers can't get. So we can get access to more capital. We can grow the business into a large-scale business. We'll take away from foreign suppliers, since there are no local suppliers, and we'll go to international markets as well. And again, buy out those other investors, run it as a company. Well, its dealings with Baudry get even worse. And we see some shades of Romeo and Juliet here coming in. So now the families get involved in here. EI's daughter, Victorine, and Baudry's son, Ferdinand, fall in love and get an understanding. You know, these are times of long engagements and so forth. So now to complicate all the things that we have here. Well, Ferdinand has an idea, this dream of getting a European education. So EI is very much encouraging him to, yeah, go to Europe, go to school in Europe, with the idea that, you know, that old saw, out of sight, out of mind, that the two of them will forget about each other. So he encouraged him to go out. But he comes back 3 years later with his degree, and it's the other end of that old saw. It's absence makes the heart grow fonder. So they get married. So now we've got a familiar link between the families that are going to help to hold together this relationship with the two. But the groom, within 2 months, dies of pneumonia. So now there's really no link between the families to hold them together, and things really fall apart here. Woodward resigns his partnership. He sues to break up the company, and it drags on for more than 3 years and here before finally the court rules sustained that the Dupont has the right. He can't break up the company. He can sell his shares or do what he wants, but he can't force a breakup of the company. Well, during this time now, we go to the War of 1812. Now, just before the war, we still got a lot of other producers out here that are trying to produce, but not being very successful with it. They lack the skills, but often they underbid. You know, the government's got to go through this bidding process, but their powder is so poor that often the DuPonts are asked to reprocess the powder in order to make it viable. So they become the preferred supplier here. During the war, they supply more than 1 million pounds. So this is during about a 3.5, 4 year period of powder. So now their reputation really blossoms. They're everywhere, and they become a major factor in here. They build a new mill further along the Brandywine, so kind of adjacent to where they are. They've expanded out into further. But the war experiences tell EI, and he tells his sons, that they've got to regard the relationship with the nation in the time of war as a trust and must neither prey upon the necessities of the hour nor neglect our duties. In other words, there's often during war a concern about profiteering, you know, making too much money. How much is too much? Well, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. But he's telling his sons who are going to run the business when he's gone, keep that in mind, that we have a public trust here to do. Well, America is growing here. EI dies in 1834 at the age of 63. He's succeeded by his sons. Henry becomes the main driving force among the sons here. These sons and their sons will continue the business on for quite a while. But there's booming growth. We've got the gold rush in California that are drawing people out and things out there that need gunpowder, building the Western railroads. The Civil War is coming in. Astor's Fur Company is out. The fur trade is one of the largest industries in the country at this time, and it's largely dependent on gunpowder, being able to get the animals and trade with the Native Americans who are the main suppliers of the animal pelts in here. So they become them there. Forts and trading posts everywhere need gunpowder. Every wagon train that goes out is packed with several barrels of gunpowder. So we talked about how necessity that it is in here. So here's how the sales have grown from 1840, around 209,000, to 1860 on the eve of the Civil War, $750,000 in here. So tremendous growth in here. Now, Delaware was long considered kind of a southern state. Technically, it's south of the Mason-Dixon line. And many thought that, and it was a slave state, many thought that it was going to succeed and go with the South. But Henry Dupont is very much an advocate of the Union and works hard to prevent Delaware from joining the secession. Now, the Confederates had only 2 small factories, one in South Carolina, one in Tennessee for gunpowder, so they needed to get gunpowder from somewhere else. So as a staunch Unionist, Henry does everything he can to keep gunpowder from falling into the hands of the Confederates here. Producers in Atlanta and in Richmond who want to produce gunpowder write to him for advice about the technical aspects of How do we build a gunpowder factory? Well, what is Henry going to tell him? He says, be careful, it's very dangerous. So that was his advice. So once they succeeded, the southern states militia goes out and starts taking gunpowder from the various places where the Federals have it stored in here, and they seize merchants' gunpowder as well, including the Duponts. They seize about $110,000 worth. As we saw, that's a significant portion of their sales from 1860. So this puts quite a financial strain on the company, but they're determined that they're not going to sell powder here. They ultimately will supply about 40% of all the gunpowder for Union needs during the war. So we see how their sales continued to pick up in here. So we see the big year in 1864, 1,625,000 in there. So tremendous expansion of the business. Well, at the end of the war, we've got a huge supply and a huge capacity for making more. So what happens when you have oversupply and overcapacity? The price goes down. We're not making much money. We've got an excess of producers out here. So we see them form the Gunpowder Trade Association, sometimes called the Powder Trust. And this was a time of a lot of trust coming together. Different businesses, we'll talk about this again with Standard Oil. But as a way of managing supply. So all the manufacturers, the major manufacturers, formed an association in 1872, with DuPont being the largest producer, taking the lead in doing this. As we said, we see others, the Tobacco Trust with American Tobacco, Standard Oil, doing the same kind of things, going together to create business. We also have a panic, or as we would call it today, a recession. This is a Great Recession category thing. So this really accelerates the trust efforts in here. Their goals, and these are kind of straight from the meeting agenda of the first meeting of the groups, is to regulate the powder market to avoid overproduction. In the cutthroat competition, lowering prices and price wars, establish sales quotas. So each company is going to be assigned a certain amount of sales and territory in which to make the sales. And to get control of those companies that have not joined the association. So nobody's going to be outside of our control here. So they bought some of the companies here. Hazard Powder out of Enfield, Connecticut was one that they bought. Strategies, production quotas, market allocation. You're going to sell to this market, you sell to this market. Fixing the price, you can't charge more or less than this price. Putting their patents together, sharing the patents, so that anybody outside of the group is not going to be able to use those patents in here. Acquire competitors, vertical integration, that is, that they go from just manufacturing the powder to transportation of the raw materials, to the mining of the raw materials, owning the land the materials are on. So this is vertical integration, going all the way back up the supply chain as far as you can go. And lobbying. Well, the first thing you've got to do when you've got a monopolistic business is make sure that the political environment is in your favor, so you got to lobby. So they become very effective at doing this and controlling the market for several decades. But we also see during this time a great deal of innovation. Alfred Nobel has created dynamite. It really is a boom to the explosive market here. DuPont gets a license and starts manufacturing themselves. Lamont DuPont, the grandson of EI, has been president, but he's so excited about the production of dynamite that he resigns, goes out and starts his own business to do this. A company called Rapano Chemical Company. So they're making these high-powered dynamite-type explosives. But he dies in an explosion 4 years later in here. Dupont kind of goes back, buys that company, pulls it back in under its umbrella. So it's now in the high explosive in addition to the gunpowder business. And they create smokeless powder. One of the problems you see on the battlefield when you see black powder is after the first round, you can't see anything because all the smoke is out everywhere. So they developed a cellulose, from tree fibers, smokeless powder in 1893. So less visible, a boon to war. Now this is a political cartoon from the era of people being concerned about all the trust out there. And this is showing them as the bosses of the Senate. It's the corporations, the big businesses, the trust that are pulling the strings of all the senators to do here. But in spite of that, they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in July of 1890. So the name says everything, right? It's antitrust. It's a way to legally break up these trust organizations. Section 1 prohibits the contracts, combinations, and conspiracies to restrain trade. So these are the very things that the trusts are designed to do, is to manage trade. Makes it illegal to monopolize, attempt to monopolize, or conspire to monopolize any part of trade or commerce. So these are the two main provisions. So the idea really is break up these trusts in here. Well, the impact is pretty limited initially because they don't get support from the judges for this. They're saying that basically this is not allowed. And so they make it very narrow. So it takes quite a while before they get enough new judges or whatever that are going to overturn this. And Theodore Roosevelt then becomes involved in here, known as a trust buster. So he really starts out to vigorously enforce. And we start seeing that. So Justice Department filed in 1907 a suit against the powder trust, including DuPont in here. Circuit Court in Delaware found DuPont and others guilty of restraint of trade, a violation of the Antitrust Act, and they ordered the breakup of several of the companies, including DuPont. So DuPont splits into 3 companies. They're ordered to divest 52%, that is, they keep 48%. They create a new company called Atlas Powder, 26%, Hercules Powder, the other 26%. They will later go back and sometime later buy these companies back, but that takes a while. But this breakup pushed DuPont into other fields. It says, we can't be the huge company of gunpowder, let's get into some other fields. So they moved away from the antitrust practices, started being more competitive and innovative in other things. World War I comes, they are looking at explosion again of demand from this. They become again the biggest supplier, around 40%, producing at one point 900,000 pounds of smokeless powder a day. It's hard to imagine that much powder. Get into R&D, they're asked to produce chemical weapons. So they do research and development at the request of the government. And they start diversifying. They get into paint for camouflage, adhesive, gas mask glass, coated fabrics, all these kinds of things. And sales go from 25 million before the war to at the end of the war, 319 million. So just a huge increase here. Workforce goes from 5,000 to 100,000 in 4 years. That's a lot of hiring. Best I managed was 4,000 one year. So after the war, they start leveraging their innovations in chemistry, plastics, fibers, to other civilian applications. So they get into all these things. They acquire some chemical companies. and a small, struggling automobile company, General Motors. Now, General Motors has kind of gone up and down during this time, and in early 1920s, they're in a lot of trouble. They've kicked Will Durant to the curb again, the founder of General Motors. So DuPont, during the war, starts making purchases, and by 1919, they own almost a quarter of the company. When GM faces a post-war financial crisis, a different Pierre Samuel here becomes the president, and he appoints a fellow named Alfred P. Sloan Jr. to be his number 2 guy, and eventually he'll become the number 1 guy. And if you know anything about GM, you know that Sloan made it the world's largest automobile company. DuPont continued to buy into, they owned about 36%. But now they become the number 1 supplier, almost a monopolistic supplier to GM. So GM kind of becomes almost a subsidiary in terms of supplying paints, fabrics, and all these, and a lot of advancements in automobile materials in here. So GM, as we said, becomes the world's largest auto producer. Well, Justice Department starts putting them under the magnifying glass here and files suit for antitrust. In other words, that GM's the largest, DuPont owns it, and they have this deal with paint, fabrics, and all these things that nobody else can get into, so they sue. Supreme Court orders their breakup, so over a 10-year period, DuPont divests itself of General Motors. After the First World War, they began more R&D, and in 1935, they adopt better things for better living through chemistry. That later becomes shortened to better living through chemistry that you may have been familiar with. And they developed something called nylon. A fellow named Wallace Carruthers was hired from another company and starts working on polyamides. And he creates something called Fiber 66 because it's made of 2 components, each with 6 carbon atoms in here, so you get 66 out of that. High tensile strength, abrasion resistant, high temperature capacity, dries quickly, low frictional problem. I mean, it's a great material. They patented and trademarked the word nylon, and the first, really the first truly synthetic fibers, strictly from chemicals, not some biological product included in it. And the first product was Dr. West's toothbrushes. They had their old toothbrush here. They sold it 50 cents, but the nylon, they praised as being even better, but they sold it for 25 cents. Well, many of you will know what the number 1 product was in the early days. It was introduced and became a sensation at the World's Fair in 1939. They launched it officially as a product in May of 1940. They sent out across the country 4 million pairs of stockings. And within 4 days, all the popular sizes were gone. So great demand for that. Well, it got its name, you know, the engineer said, well, just call it Fiber 66. The marketing guy says, no way. So the first idea was, we'll call it Duperoo. DuPont pulls a rabbit out of the hat. And 400 other names were suggested, including No Run, you know, the stockings, No Run. But it turned out not to be completely true, so we said we can't do that. So how about Neuron? No, well, maybe nylon, and nylon with a Y. So it kind of goes through this naming process to become nylon. Well, the academic businessy part of things here, they use a variety of different techniques. Systematic strategic planning becomes very important. You know, far thinking out ahead of things. Whereas most companies think about next year and what they're going to do, they start way thinking ahead. And diversification, that is to get into different businesses. One of the problems with running a variety of different businesses, though, is how do we control them? How do we know where we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. That's important when you're in the gunpowder business, right? Getting a bang for the buck. So they developed something called the concept of return on investment. That is looking at your net income divided by the amount of investment in there, and you can look at the separate businesses on that, and whoever's got the highest numbers doing the best because they're getting more return on the amount invested. So this becomes a way of controlling. They get a decentralized structure, that is that each business or type of business is separated out so that you don't have plastics and explosives run by the same manager in here. So they're looking at in the specialties in there. This become a key thing how they do. So a variety of other things, scientific management and so forth, they get involved in. And early human resource management, allowing employees to buy stock, being concerned about their welfare, providing insurance, these kinds of things. So they're very early in there. A lot of it is they want to prevent unions, so they're doing things that the unions in other places are asking for. Don't have much time for this, but they got charged in 1930s with profiteering back in the war. Remember those tremendous profits they were making? An investigative committee called the Dye Committee looked at them. They never found any hard evidence that there was a conspiracy or that they did anything more. It's simply the business grew to such an extent that the absolute numbers of profit is high, but the percentage based on investment was not out of line with other businesses. What else? They got involved in the Manhattan Project. This is important. After the trouble with the investigative committee about profiteering, they said, next time we have a government contract, we're going to work on a cost plus fixed fee basis. That is, that simply whatever the cost is plus a fee, that's what we'll charge the government. And their fee was $1. So when I was working at Savannah River plant, they had the contract there. They had about 10,000 employees there making plutonium for bombs, tritium for bombs, and I was involved in the program for plutonium for space program. They were making $1 during the time there. They've gone through a lot of things, other products you know about, Teflon, Kevlar, and so forth. They've had some trouble with environment, as all the chemical companies had. They've probably been better than many, but still have problems. They've pledged this year that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. They've had a number of spin-offs, changed. The company has really broken up and separated into several different companies. And this year in May, they announced another breakup. And so they're really diversifying in some ways of getting groups that are similar to be separate businesses now. So that's kind of where they stand today in terms of in the marketplace. They are specialized in industrial kinds of products for the most part. All right, any quick questions about anything for the fellow the next program gets mad at me? They don't. In other words, this is kind of like a pro bono thing that they're offering their technical services to the government in there. So they're not concerned about making money off of it. You know, they're still making, whether we had good salaries, they had good benefits and all this, but the company itself didn't make money off their management of that facility. Thank you for your attention. Next week, we're going to clean up with Todd.